Good morning, American government. Hope you had a wonderful Easter and a great break. Good news is only 4 days this week, so you can do this. We are going to move into chapter 13, and it's in regards to the constitutional freedoms. We've all heard, or many of us have heard someone say, "It's my constitutional right." And the question is, what exactly does that mean? And when you ask people, go, "Well, what's that mean?" "Well, I have rights." "Well, what kind of rights?" "Well, some of the rights that are in the Constitution." Some will refer to the Bill of Rights, those top 10, the first 10 amendments in the Constitution. Some go, I don't know, but I have rights. And so when we start talking about constitutional freedom, it is a complex, detailed, has lots of arms and legs, and it is very, very complex. In our judicial system, we have been arguing in our court system for the last 230 years on interpretations of the Constitution. What exactly are our rights? We have discussed before when we looked at the Constitution, and sometimes the verbiage, it's open for interpretation. We understand the Constitution is a living, breathing document. The interpretation has changed over time. I imagine we have been arguing and debating for the last 230 years about what does that exactly mean in the Constitution, and I'm going to assume that we probably will be arguing the next 230 years, trying to determine exactly what does that mean in the Constitution. So we're going to look at some of these constitutional freedoms. We will begin somewhere with the Bill of Rights, those top 10, because they begin to outline what we think it's my constitutional right. I have rights. As an American citizen, I have rights. But it starts before that. And so what we're going to do is initially we're going to look at what the United Nations, United Nations is an organization that has about a little under 200 countries belong to it, and they come together and they have a similar viewpoint of the world. And so what we'll do is we're going to look at what the United Nations says, that people have fundamental human rights. Before we get into the United States and your constitutional rights, let's just take a look at what the world, the consensus, not everybody agrees, but what the world says, these are your rights as a human. So let's begin. The United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We're going to look at maybe 30 of them if we have the time. Number one, we are all of us were born free and equal. You know that's not true. We think that's true, and we want to say that in the United States, but across the world that is not true. But as a consensus, as a human being, you have the right to be born free and equal. You have the right to not be discriminated against. We know that's not true as well. We have discrimination in our country in 2020 based on color of skin, religion, age, sex. It goes on and on. The right to life. In this country, we debate every year the right to choose, pro-life, pro-choice. So a fundamental right that we think, the world thinks as a human being, these are your rights. And yet they're debated in our country every day. Slavery. I think we all agree that no one should be made a slave. It is a black eye of our country's history. At one time we didn't feel that way, but now we do. That you as a human should not be subject to torture. I think most of us can agree that you should not be tortured. Number 6, you have the right no matter where you go. You go across the state line, you have rights. You go to other countries, you have rights, although you're subject to their laws. But we have rights, and they sort of transfer with us. They move with you. Number 7, we are all equal before the law. We've looked at a couple cases here in our country. When we start looking at our judicial system, we want to say everyone gets treated fairly, everyone gets treated equally. And yet, we can point out case after case, well, that's not true. Your human rights are protected by law. We hope so. But the question is, then becomes, is the law, is it applied equally and fairly to everyone? It's debatable. Number 9, no unfair detainment. You have the right to move around. Can't just throw you in prison, can't just throw you in jail for no reason. You have the right to a trial. We'll look at that in our Constitution. Remember those famous words in our Constitution? You have the right to a speedy trial. And again, I've asked the question before, what exactly is speedy? We're always innocent till proven guilty. It is a fundamental right that we have here in this country. And we tend to believe in that, and we want that to be true. You can be accused of something, but the consensus is you're innocent until there's no doubt that you are guilty. You have the right to privacy. In this world of the cyber world, this is a question every day. What's your right to privacy? Are you being tracked? Is someone tracking you on your phone? Is someone tracking you on your computer right now? What rights of privacy do you have? We think phone taps, right? The government shouldn't do that. But yet, what goes on with your computer? Who's looking at it? We've all done this, right? You go on Amazon, you buy something, or you look at something, and the next day you go, you get on your Google search, and the first thing that pops up, an ad pops up about those very things that you looked at. Doesn't seem very private to me. You have the freedom to move around. If you don't want to stay in the great state of Florida, you have the right. Get up and go. We sort of think that's a fundamental right. You have the right to seek a safe place to live. I think most of us agree with that. We all have a right to belong to a country. I think most of us agree with that. And again, these are human rights from the United Nations. Marriage and family. You have the right to marry. You have the right to have a family. Right? When we talk about marriage in this country, the debate has been, continues to be, what about gay marriage? How is that recognized with the law? You have the right to own things. That's one of the things we like about capitalism, right? This private ownership. It's yours, you bought it, it's yours, you earned it, whatever, it's yours. And you ought to be able to keep it, and someone shouldn't be able to take it, right? A government should not be able to take it unless there's some good reason. The question becomes, what's a good reason? Freedom of thought. You can think of just anything you want to. And I think most of us think of a lot of things, and we like that. Freedom of expression. You have the right to express the way you feel. Except there is a caveat to that. It's not totally true. Yes, there are rules on how you can express yourself. But you do have the right to express yourself. You have the right to public assembly. Again, when we start looking at our Constitution, we'll start to see that. That is in the first one. Amendment number 1. You have the right to public assembly. You have the right to get together. You have the right to, as a group. Except there are some exceptions to that. You have the right to democracy. Well, we think so in this country, but there are countries, right, that some of that democratic values, some of those democratic processes, they do it differently than we do. And maybe we don't think that's a pure democracy. So that's up to debate. Social Security. We enjoy that in this country. I certainly am very thankful for Social Security, right? And it's this idea that, if you get sick, you're going to get some help. And we're right now in the midst of this COVID virus. The very fact that it makes us feel good that you can go reach out and get help. The government is saying right now, if this illness impacts you and your family, don't worry about the bill. Just go get help. The government will take care of the bill. We like that. As a worker, you have rights. We have child labor laws. Right? Some of you that are minors, that you have jobs, you can only work so many hours. You can't work past a certain hour at night and those type of things. We think we should protect workers. Right? The world, right? These are human rights. They think people should be treated fairly. Yet, if some of you would take off your shoes right now and see where your shoes are made, right, we're going to see Vietnam, China, right, Indonesia. And the truth of the matter is there's probably some 10 or 11-year-old kid who's been working 16 hours in a sweatshop making your shoes. We don't feel that that's right. But the world thinks workers should have rights. The right to play. We like this in America. We like our downtime. We like our free time. But again, the world, right? The UN says these are some basic human rights. You have the right to play. You have the right for food and shelter. We agree with that. And yet sometimes we spend money, right? Our government spends money, you spend money, I spend money, and yet we have homeless people that are right down there on First Street in our own town. You have the right to an education. Here's something, right, that this is the world, not the United States, but the world agrees with this, that primary schools should be free. We just saw yesterday where Bernie Sanders just dropped out of the race. Bernie Sanders says not only should primary school be free, college should be free. So we don't all agree on that, but as a world, we agree that, you know what, education is a good thing. And we've at least agreed as a world that primary school education is good. Copyright, and again, we'll talk about some of those things, right? And we like that in this country, that it spurs on creativity, this entrepreneurship. We want people, right? We want you to be creative. And for that, we think you should be protected. We think that's reasonable. The world thinks that's reasonable. A fair and free world. Again, I'm not quite sure if I understand it. Sounds like utopia. A fair and free world. I guess depends who you want to talk to. What's fair? Who's free? Responsibility as a human being, a human right. You have a duty to be responsible. Yes, you want some rights, you're going to have some rights, but you need to be responsible with those rights. You need to, need to treat others properly, things like that. And the last one, no one can take away your human rights. And we tend to agree with that. We think there are some basic, fundamental human rights. As a human being on this planet, you have rights. And that is sort of the foundation of when we start talking about our Constitution and we start looking at our constitutional rights. We've heard people make that statement. It's my constitutional right. And the question is, exactly what does that mean? And again, those interpretations of our Constitution, it's a living, breathing document. Our interpretation has changed over the last 230 years, and I suspect it'll change in the next 200 years. So we're going to take a look at some of those basic constitutional rights that you have that are granted to us in the Bill of Rights.